Well,
Sure.
then it's the game ceases to keep track of that. Let's say, um,
If you
so
never come back.
or you just never come back. Sure, but let's say the game does supposedly keep track of it, but it doesn't have any impact on anything outside of that level, and you never go back to that level.
Hmm. So
That
basically, in that case, if an observer were to come into being in that environment, it would have all the data that it would need to render what would have wound up occurring for the observer. It just never gets to that point. It's still a potential.
Have they tested this with other species per se?
I don't know the answer to that question, but when I really did a deep dive into the double slit experiment, I started having some interesting questions. Like, let's say you're shooting a stream of photons one by one through a wall, and there's two slits, and there's a human observer, and the human is on the verge of death. Can you determine, based on the nature of the particles that go through, the moment of actual death, the point at which that individual observer no longer has an impact on the cosmos based on the behavior of those particles? I don't know. It's never been tested. What about a dog? Is the observation itself sufficient, or does observation and comprehension of the observation necessary? In which case a dog wouldn't work. You know, there's a lot of these kinds of questions that simply haven't been probed yet. And I think that the results of the double slit experiment really demand these kinds of nuanced experiments if we can.
This brings some reality to some commonly not laughed at things, but things like mother's instincts, things like the example I was about to use was, so my girlfriend dated her for a few years now. She loves her dog, very connected to her dog, And she goes, watch, the dog will know whenever your dog knows whenever you're going to be showing up. It'll stand up and start looking for you whenever you get like within a mile or two of the house. And I called bullshit. Of course I called bullshit on that. And then she goes, watch, I'll text you whenever I'm showing up. I shit you not. This dog, you'll be sitting right here crying, like just crying its ass off. And then, she's like, okay, I'm entering the neighborhood. And I'm like, I got location tracking to I'm like, okay, she's at the front of the neighborhood. And this dog starts getting a little antsy. And I'm going, what in the world is going, like, there's no physical sense that that's like, I don't believe that her smell can travel ahead of her, like all that stuff. But you see weird things like that happen.
Mm-hmm. We're naturally biased to the senses that we do have, and will not really, the notion of other senses or other capabilities of coming into possession of information elude us if we don't have direct access to that kind of sense. And we have more than 5 senses. We have a sense of balance. We got a lot of different senses. But I think, based on my observations of dogs, they have a sense we don't have. I have no clue what the fuck it is. But they seem to demonstrate behavior that responds to something that I don't respond to. There's something there that it's like humans are all blind and yet dogs can see. And you feel this dog behave weird. You don't know why. It's sensing something, and it sees like a thunderstorm or somebody coming into its territory. And you're oblivious to it. You would never even conceive of that. The same way a dog would never conceive of retrocausation.
Okay, so look, I'm really curious about this question you brought up about the guy who dies thing. So, okay, what happens if an observer collapses something but then dies, leaving collapses a potentiality, then dies, and there's no other observer present? Does it uncollapse upon the person's death?
Yes. Well, I don't know about upon its death, but upon the absence of an observer, what is collapsed, the collapsed aspect of it ceases to be, but the underlying potential that defined the nature of the collapse is still running.
And could a test like that be somehow prolonged across maybe a longer distance or slowed down to where you could almost, manipulate it to determine if there was any relevancy to that and they found any correlation, if they could somehow prolong the experiment and could you find a time of death for somebody, could you determine it?
Yeah, because if what we're talking about is a cognitive process processing the observation itself, and that is responsible for the collapse, then a dead person is no longer processing that, and you should see the nature of the photons as they're being shot through one by one immediately change back to probability fields, waves, as opposed to particles.
And then can you go recollapse it the other way and have it retroactively recreate history such that it was never collapsed? But you wouldn't know it was the other way. That's the problem.
This is tricky stuff.
I really want to know if it has something to do with a human. I think honestly, it could almost you could almost get into proving like religious type stuff with it. If there was any validity to a human being having a stronger effect on it than an animal, because if what you're saying is true and you're saying it's provable in cases, and I'm taking your word for it, of course,
it's demonstratable. The behavior is demonstratable, but what we're proving, we don't know.
Right. So
we're proving spooky action at a distance.
Yeah, I really want to. That's crazy, man.
Dude, reality is not at all like what Newtonian physics has led us to believe it is.
Right. There's lots of magic going on. A lot of magic.
So I have another, and maybe it's my upbringing, maybe it's who I am, but if someone would have told me, hey, this psychic person's going to tell you your future, I immediately go, okay, bullshit, right? So I'm out in Florida about 2 years ago, opening up. Anyway, I was out in Florida, and I met this girl. She worked for the company that I was she's like, I'm a psychic. And I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, whatever. Right. She's like, I do tarot cards. I'm like, okay, whatever, stay away from me. And she's like, all right, stay after work. And, let me show you whatever. I'm down to see what the hell's going on here. So this girl looks me straight in the face. The first day I met her. And she closes. Anyway, she just nails my current situation. And she makes some bold ass predictions. Your business partner is going to do this to you, and in December of this year, he's going to screw you, and he's your best friend right now. Like crazy shit. I shit you not, it all came true.
Enough to convince you that she was telling you shit that was not random.
Oh, so mind blown, right? I was like, she's like, you're honestly only here because you're trying to get away from. Names the exact situation I'm getting away from, stuff that I don't talk to people about. Anyway, she did it, right? And yeah, my mind got opened up to a lot of different possibilities from that whole experience.
All right, let me ask you a few questions about that then. Are you convinced that she had come into possession of that kind of supernatural information? Are you convinced of that?
I'm convinced that she came to that.
Did she actually possess valid data that related directly to what had or was going to occur? Actual information, not guesses. Do you believe she had come into possession of that data?
I don't know my answer to that question, but for the life of me, I wish I could. I want to be able to answer that question, but I don't know, man. All I know is that do I believe that she had access to that data? Yes.
Okay, that's good because now we can have some fun. So there had to be some.
Go ahead. Sorry.
There had to be some mechanism, some means for her to access that information, right? And it wasn't direct experience. So if she had the information, if you're convinced that it was the actual information about what was to come, then that information had to come from somewhere. And I am not opposed to the notion that there are entities that have access that's trans-temporal and maybe can give us information. The same way if you got that's another issue. Yeah, that's another valid point. The law of attraction stuff, self-conviction, and you fulfilling prophecies, that's another thing that should be considered.
Okay, so the creepiest stuff about it was the futuristic stuff. I totally agree. There's forces in nature. If you think, okay, So screw all the futuristic stuff. The creepiest stuff about all of it was what she was telling me about, and I became good friends with her, and actually made her take the whole not that the test says anything, but she got her answer was like she got ENTP on all of that. But I know that I'm not saying that has any relevance to what I'm saying, but what I'm saying, but what I am saying is what was creepy about it was her analysis of who I was currently and what I was doing currently and my motives for what I was doing currently. And I mean, because it was like, it was shit that like I don't talk about, like, okay. And it was, you know, stuff that's like, anyway, and this girl didn't know me. Like I wasn't supposed to even. She worked for this other company, and like we had hired her that day to come work for. Like she had no way of knowing at all that she was going to be and like meeting me at all.
So let's just take that account for granted. Let's just say that we can trust it at face value, just for the sake of discussion.
Yeah,
how'd she get that data?
Jeez, man.
Just for the sake of speculation, how might one come into possession of information relating to experiences that they personally never had or never read about or had any epistemic access to? Where would that data come from? Not even how did it get to her, but just where might it have come from?
I know you're not going to back this, but like my honest thought about it, and I have other evidence to prove this. But I believe it's demonic, and I believe it involves a level of misguided spiritual gifts and demons and stuff like that.
Well, those are loaded mythical kind of terms.
It's not a good answer to the question. I know.
No, it's okay. I'm just pointing out those are like mystical terms. They have their own paradigm. However, the relationship of those entities and the reality that we're experiencing might be real. And when you say demons, that's like a way of defining something that is not well understood. But today we have concepts like hackers. So where once we might have hackers.
Okay.
What would be the difference between angels that have rebelled and came down here and did some shit and a development team that decided to hack into a system it has access to and do shit down here? What's the functional difference?
Human possession, human.
Okay, so they can hack us too. Still, right. What's the functional difference between a hacker and a demon if the cosmos is the platform? Demon is a political term. It's a pejorative term.
I don't use it in a political term, though.
But it is in religious context. Demon is bad, angel is good, right?
Correct.
Same being type, right?
Same what? Say it again.
Same type of being, right?
Correct.
Okay, so demon and angel are political terms. They're politically loaded. We can't use them.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, but wait, hold on though. What if the person is objectively doing bad shit? Then wouldn't it be appropriate to?
Which I have proof that they are. Like
who's defining if it's bad?
What is it transgressive?
The Bible, which is another political, it's another term that it assumes that we agree on a lot of things we don't agree on. So
okay, so you're on political party A side. B sees
this has been my reasoning of it to date. By the way,
this stuff is a lot easier to grapple with when you strip the political stuff and the biases away and you look at the functional relationships between the concepts.
Okay, well, let's do that. How the hell could she have? So, I mean, I feel like I have a good sense of seeing people and knowing what they've gone through. But here, let me tell you some specifics. This is, I know we're on a fucking recorded channel, whatever. Literally says, she's like, you're running away from guilt that you feel because of the person you're dating and stuff that you don't want them to find out, and you came out here without even informing them, and you told them, but truly you're just trying to get away from it all because you need to process it, and that was exactly what I did. And I didn't tell anyone that. So Like, what the hell? Like,
those sort of
Well, but see, that's
those
go
sort
ahead.
of those sort of storytellings, people will find aspects of their lives that do fit them. She knows you're new. She built on things that are obviously present. You've come from someplace, and she's telling some sort of story about guilt. She's reading your body language, see how you're reacting to it, and then going
and see,
along with that.
I get all that, man. I get all that. Like, okay, like you have to trust me on this. Like, I could go like 5. I could give you like 10 more examples of shit that she said. She literally had her eyes closed the whole time. Because I could relate to that as far as like I feel like when I see someone, I feel like I could tell you what they've gone through in life. I feel like I could tell you stuff. But she says the color of the hair of like the person she's talking about. She told me. I mean, here, let me think of a better example of some shit that like she said.
Well, frankly, that's kind of a waste of time because we're not really concerned about whether or not she was telling you. The real concern is if you, in having that experience with her, are convinced she had access to data that she had no reason to have access to. What Eric and I think is irrelevant. That's really the key point here because you're the one who was convinced.
Okay.
So if you were convinced and she did have access to data beyond the scope of what her experience would have provided her with, it's on the table that an outworld entity of some type might be feeding her data.
Correct.
And that outworld entity may have access to our timeline in a way that we don't understand.
Correct.
Maybe, maybe not. But
I think it's Mr. Magic Pants. Correct.
Say it again.
But see if, like, let's say somebody was in a coma in a hospital, right? And you could put a little device on the side of their head and you could enter into their comatose dream state and influence it. It's the same thing. It's the same relational concept that I'm getting at when it comes to quote unquote demons coming down here and doing shit. There may be intelligences that have an access to this cosmos that we don't understand and are fucking with us.
Could be this chick's really
I don't think
that whole thing.
That's true, but his conviction is the only thing we have to go on how effective she was at that.
The point is, even if we don't find, it seems to me a battle between observers, and the observers who are looking for empirics to justify belief in such things are going to test people, and they're going to successfully observe a lack of empirics because. It's like when pressed to perform on the moment, it wouldn't be magic if you could prove it and explain why it worked.
Sorry, internet kicked me out.
Well,
see, as opposed to a lot of intelligent people, I'm very sympathetic to some of these concepts, but I'm adamant about pulling them out of what I consider the political world of religion and taking sides and all of that. I mean, okay, so let's say you're a religious person and you're trying to attribute goodness or badness to these entities, right? Demons are bad, angels are good. Well, what's God? Is God good? God evidently wipes out all the life on a planet except for a tiny, tiny fraction of the life. If I did that shit, we don't even have a word for that level of destruction. Genocide doesn't cover it.
I agree.
If we're going to have a different word when a deity does it than when we do it, okay, I'm going to abandon the paradigm where we're signing those kinds of terms.
I agree. A chosen people doesn't line up with the concept of fairness and decision and stuff. I agree with all that.
Yeah, does God love me and care about me? Not the way I define it.
Okay, but we don't have to.
Right, and the argument against that would be, well, that's not for you to define. But again, on note of our conversation here, I do agree that's a huge fallacy and hole in the whole thing.
Yeah, I like to take all the good, bad, all this the language that starts imparting specific qualities to these ideas, and just talk about how they might relate to one another and affect one another. Angel, demon, same thing to me. Nazi Christian, they're both human.
Yeah, well, neither of them are definitive about the individual human being they describe, but they do note potentially significant differences. I'm Geordie LaForge from Star Trek Next Generation. And I just want to say thanks for watching Talking with Spanish People. And don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.